This gospel, my friends, takes me back to one retreat I was giving to the Benedictine nuns close to our monastery in Italy. The prioress came to me afterwards and asked, "What does this mean?" The problem was who to fear, and I had to explain it meant just what it said, that the risk is that if he is not feared, then hell, which is actually named here directly, is the consequence. The original has Gehenna, which is the place where rubbish was burned near Jerusalem. Yes, I tell you, fear him. Now, I was just thinking, as I read this morning, how in this world many people in practice behave as though the only thing being whatever to be feared were human beings, that the all is being judged by human beings. And look around you, in most spheres of life, in practice, that is the mindset today. People are afraid of what they're going to be judged by, about, with other people only. And it's always happened in some shape or form. People are keen on competing in every sphere of life. And those of you who are engaged in the academic life know only too well what that means. But also in sport, but also in beauty, also in, right now, a whole new sphere. How many followers one has virtually on the cybersphere, and on it goes. In other words, people think that they are important in the measure in which they are judged well. It happens then politically. If one observes the scene in manifestos, in candidatures, and then in how people, as it were, fall from grace in the political sphere, it happens then, as one goes higher, in the question of people in control. And to the maximum it happens in the case of people who come to the maximum of control, like dictators. And this morning it came to my mind just like a flash, when reflecting on that very verse, a kind of vision flashed before my eyes of the last moments of, I suppose, someone who will go down forevermore in history, but had a huge amount of power, and is not that far away from us in time. Adolf Hitler. We know now pretty well exactly the last hours of his life. It was a bit uncertain initially, but what actually happened is that the Russians actually got hold of those who knew exactly what had happened, the immediate staff around him, and sequestered them for quite a long time, and submitted them to very severe conditions, which included being taken out of their cell at night and submitted to torture over a long period, individually and with all kinds of cross-examination and insistence so as to make them trip up, in such a way that they had a foolproof version from all concerned that this exactly, step by step, was what happened. So we know exactly the end of Hitler and Eva Braun. It can be actually studied if you're young on YouTube, it's all there. But what hit me was this. Right in that drama, God just didn't enter into the equation. You could see actually the gradual disintegration of a historic figure, somebody who had influence over the passage of time. And then you see what is happening in the last seconds, really. It's one bullet simultaneously combined with a dose of cyanide, but it's the bullet that does it in time, takes Adolf Hitler off immediately after Eva Braun has done the same. But in her case, no bullet was necessary. the cyanide did it immediately. Now, I was just thinking to myself, because we know through exorcism what happened to his soul. We know, unfortunately, that he didn't make it, because he's come out, his soul, in fairly recent exorcism, as have other great people of history like Nero, who had also a great importance historically. Cain also has come out in exorcism, which shows that that is not just a myth. Cain did exist, which is interesting. Others too, but there's no need to go into them. I'll just stay for a second with this one, because what actually happened was this. One can only presume that in those last hours, including the moment in which he and Eva Braun had contracted marriage legally, it is a legal marriage because it was all signed, but they feasted it rather sadly, a toast, and it would seem that the context in the air was this. It's actually said by somebody who's actually been present. With regard to toasting the future, there was no future. It was a very strange wedding, underground. And the nature of darkness was so huge in that bunker that it was like a human demonic mingling of two worlds. In the same bunker was his closest collaborator, was it Goebbels? And he had his family there, and they had made a pact that he and his wife, the general and his wife, would give an injection to their children and then commit suicide. And in fact, in the middle of incessant operations in terrible conditions, the surgeon was called down to the bunker by Hitler himself to get doses of poison. And they went eventually to this family, and so on. All this to say that at that point, the big question obviously was not really being faced. How could it have been? Because at that point, all that matters, you can see, was not ending up as had ended up just previously, and that was influenced him in this decision, Mussolini and his mistress, Chiara. He married Eva Braun to avoid that, and also he made sure, by giving order to his valet, that there'd be no trace of their bodies afterwards, and they had a job getting enough petrol to do it with. They had to siphon vans and things to get enough to burn them with in blankets, so that they couldn't have that human judgment that happened to Mussolini. But you see, even at that last moment, human judgment was all that mattered. So, what happened? We don't know about Eva Braun because there was one quality in her: she was faithful to him all that time. But we do know through exorcism that Hitler didn't make it, so what actually was happening there was he was shutting his eyes, presuming that he was ending it, ending all. His body was being burnt, but without the soul present. But the soul was very much in existence. And death, by that kind of suicide, is immediate in its effect, and 1 second later the soul is out of the body and looking down immediately at the body, but then pretty quickly is moving on, and moving on in the direction of its own weight. Now, for the first time, one can presume Hitler, his soul at that point, became aware that for the first time ever, he was completely alone, forevermore, without any possibility of authority. And he was for the first time under another authority from which there was no escape. But that he was facing for the first time in a state of rebellion against him. Now, this is, in his case, very dramatic because it was something so historic. But it's not that unusual. Because, as I say, that is by now, in Western society, in practice, the mental state of a very large proportion of people on this planet. The all is human. The judgment is human. Now, that's not just based on social factors. The enemy of the soul, who has a fundamental hatred of human beings out of envy, can't bear that they should get what he lost, is doing that by every possible means. And you who are young, in the university and secondary school sphere, will be seeing that all the time before you. In practice, God is not taken seriously by the vast majority. Who is doing that? Just listen now to what is being pumped at you all the time if you put anything on from the air, television and radio. Pretty well all the time it's a continuous erosion and attack, and indeed a belittling, a making fun of, a subtle ridicule of anything which is of this order. Not just a social factor, it's demonic. We're up against a huge, massive conspiracy of silence and indeed of positive attack. Why? Because the immortal soul is the most precious thing on earth, and the devil will do anything to get it. So for you young people, don't, in the way of many young people, be ashamed of admitting your faith, because the fact is this: people who are in that mode of ridicule are concealing something, and the louder the ridicule is, the more they're concealing it and trying to avoid it. And they won't face it perhaps until death, just like Hitler, because they'll block it out by as many distractions as possible. Even in bed, they will not have a second of looking at their soul and indeed their eternity. Not just a social issue. Old Nick wants the young people and has got them at the throat. So don't be fooled. You, my friends, little friends, are in the right, because you've got all the saints, all the angels, and God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit on side. And who cares what people think? They don't have